In a previous Genesis Science Report, I detailed the biblical record and those of other Jewish historical texts to understand what they say about the biblical flood. We also concluded that such an all-encompassing event would have a witness in nearly every nation and every culture if it really was a global catastrophe. This is what the Jewish historian Josephus said, that every nation had tales of the flood. And when you start to examine this extraordinary record, you can't honestly walk away with anything but a firm conviction that this was an event that left a mark on the face of this planet. From a famous Babylonian epic to the Hindu tale of Manu, from the Greek version with Zeus destroying the earth to the Chinese story of Yu the Great and beyond, the flood narrative serves as a foundational story for every major civilization on earth. And everywhere the story took root, it spoke of divine judgment. These stories, while varied in detail, collectively point to a significant event that reshaped the course of human history. The global flood myths, therefore, are not just fairy tales, but actually witnesses of an historic event, even if they were twisted. And just as you would expect for an event this dramatic and global, people just couldn't shake this story. As we examine just a handful of these stories, remember, they're there for a reason. God judged the earth once, and it is promised that He will do it again. Let's start in the Middle East. One of the earliest recorded flood myths comes from Mesopotamia in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this epic, the gods decide to send a flood to destroy humanity, but one god warns a man, instructing him to build a boat to save his family and animals. Now, obviously, the parallels to Noah's story are very striking. In the Babylonian flood myth, the gods are annoyed by the noise of humanity, and they decide to send a flood to silence them. The God of wisdom instructs a man to build a boat to save himself, his family, and some animals. Now, if these stories were limited to the regions around Israel, well, then there would be a strong argument that maybe it was a localized flood, just a fairy tale legend. But as you do the research, it's clear that isn't the case. Let's start with Europe. In Greek mythology, did you know that Zeus decided to destroy humanity with a flood due to their wickedness too? In this story, a man is warned who builds an ark to survive the deluge with his wife. Obviously, this seems like a mirror image of those stories that have already been told. But as you travel, you would suspect that, like a game of telephone, certain aspects of the story would hold, but other details would get all jumbled up. And that does seem to be the case. So as you travel to Northern Europe, for instance, there is a Norse story that tells of a flood caused by the blood of a giant who had been killed. 2 humans survive by hiding in a tree, ensuring the continuation of humanity. So these details do differ, but there are also interesting similarities. Well, the ark was made from trees, and there were giants on the earth in both this story and in the Genesis narrative. So then we move to Asia. In Hindu mythology, the god Vishnu warns Manu of an impending flood, and he builds a boat, and he's saved along with 7 others and seeds of all plants. Interesting. This story also recounts the preservation of life and divine intervention, all themes central to the Genesis flood narrative. Now, the Chinese legend involves a massive flood sent by the gods to punish humanity. Yu the Great is the one that heroically controls the floodwaters, saving the land and its people. Again, not every detail is there, but you would expect that. You'd expect some changes in every telling and retelling. And yet the biblical narrative offers detail, historical detail, that seems to be very consistent with an historical record, not a fairy tale legend. In other words, perhaps the only true story of the flood. If that's not enough, there are a few others. In a story from Tanzania, a great flood covered the earth, with a few people surviving by seeking refuge on a high mountain. A Hawaiian myth tells us of a righteous man who somehow survives this great flood. He builds a large canoe with a house on it, saving his family and animals. Look at the similarities. In Aztec mythology, 2 people survive a flood by hiding in a hollow tree, and after the floodwaters recede, then they repopulate the earth. Finally, the American Choctaw tell of a great flood that destroys the earth, but survivors also seek refuge on a high mountain. Now, the pervasive presence of all of these flood myths across diverse cultures everywhere and regions, it underscores the reality of a real historical cataclysm. The Genesis flood provides the coherent framework that ties all of these stories together. As humanity spread across the globe after the flood, the memory of this event, you can believe it stayed with them. Knowing that this was a true event and that God has himself left himself a witness, we must also grow in our respect of God. Because while he promised that he would never flood the earth again with water, there does remain a judgment for all who are on the earth. The Apostle Peter says it best when speaking about the judgment past and the judgment to come. He said, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Fire the next time. So let's be humble and realize that there truly is good and evil, that there really is right and wrong. Let's remember that the Bible has stood the test of time, and most importantly, I want to state that my faith in the one who provides eternal salvation is just as relevant in this age as ever before. Don't let anyone convince you to ignore it. It is a reasoned faith. It is an intellectual faith, an evidenced faith, and a faith that provides eternal hope for all who receive Jesus, Yeshua, our Messiah. On the Genesis Science Report, we bring you breaking science, but at the same time, we are unashamed of our Christian faith, and you should be too.